Mozi's theological politics. Mozi's religious ideas emerged from his diagnosis of Confucian fatalism as represented by a later development of Confucianism. Confucius attempted to transform the human world and to influence his environment. But his work took effect most clearly in his own self-cultivation and his capacity to exercise influence over his disciples. He did not claim to know the heaven's intent. However, the latter-day Confucianists were devoted to the professional work in the cultivation of li, music, and the study of sacred literature. They did not believe in the ancestral spirits and nature deities. They did not think that heaven is concerned with man's historic fate. Mozi thought their general life attitudes and their views on fate, heaven, and spirits were closely connected. This he characterized as follows. Number one, Confucianists claim that heaven does not make itself manifest, and that the spirits do not display divine power, and that neither heaven nor spirits speak. Number two, they indulge in excessive and wasteful rites of mourning. Number three, they indulge in luxurious extravagances of music and dance. And number four, they believe that length of life, poverty and wealth, order and disorder, and safety and danger are all governed by fate. According to Confucianism, man can remain in contact with the Tao of inscrutable universe precisely through music and practice of rites. However, religious rites are detached from the objects of worship. What is emphasized is the religious cultural meaning that is deciphered from the religious rites. In the dialogue between Mozi and Gong Meng, a Confucianist, Gong Meng said, "There are no spirits. One must study the sacrificial rites." Mozi replied, "To maintain that there are no spirits and to study the sacrificial rites is like studying the ceremonies for treating guests without having any guests." Gong Meng's emphasis is on professional work of sacrificial rites, shows Confucianist drawback in religious rites. What is crucial to Confucianists is the moral or spiritual sentiments derived from religious rites. The moral and spiritual sentiments help to construct and consolidate familial and political reality. Latter-day Confucianists separated themselves from Confucius in their rejection of spirits. They seem to think that the sacrificial rites provide the source of moral and spiritual sentiments rather than the spirits. Mozi thought the sacrificial rites would not be genuinely established without acceptance of spirits. The spirits are the objects of supplication to which moral and spiritual sentiments are to be channeled. Gong Meng said, quote, "In ancient times, those who achieved the rank of the Son of Heaven were supreme sages. Those next to them in wisdom became prime ministers and high officials. Now, Confucius mastered the poetry and the documents, was deeply versed in rites and music, and knew all things in detail. If we assume that Confucius should have been a sage king, why did he not become a son of heaven? Mozi replied, quote, the sage must revere heaven and serve the spirits, love men universally, and stress frugality. Herein lies knowledge. Now, you say Confucius had mastered documents and poetry, etc., and was therefore fit to be a son of heaven. This is like counting a man's teeth to prove his wealth. There exists a large gap between Confucianism and Moism concerning religious knowledge. According to Moism, religious knowledge does not lie in ritual learning and ritual practice, but in religious belief and religious service. Moral and spiritual sentiments are deeply rooted in religious belief and religious service. Ritual learning and ritual practice are not adequate for a proper moral education. Gong Meng rejected the spirits and the providence of heaven. He was concerned with the preservation of ancient words and ancient dress, and he was also concerned with the meticulous observation of 3-year mourning rites. He said, quote, one must use ancient dress and ancient language. After that, there will be Ren. To him, Li is prior to Ren. A noble man is to devote himself to the assiduous practice of rites, ceremonies, and music, including maintaining the proper external demeanor. Quote, the noble man maintains his dignity and weight. Unquote. He had a strong belief in Li and Ren. He said, quote, if he is truly a good man, who will not know him? Unquote. He compared a good man who has achieved his goodness by cultivation of Li to a beautiful woman for whom men will fight even though she remains in seclusion. To this, Mozi replied that in a disordered age, men will still fight for a beautiful woman, but few will seek out a good man. Gong Meng emphasized charisma of the good man, while Mozi's stress is on the worth of the good man. Mozi said, unless he forces them to listen, no one will know him. So, Li and Ren are not enough for a man of worth. To a certain extent, what we see here is a contrast between the concept of a world as an inscrutable, impersonal order beyond the control of any conscious will, and a world in which order itself is the achievement of strenuous efforts of the wills of both gods and men. Mozi gave us a different account of the foundations of order, both cosmic order and human order. He firmly believed that normative order is based on the true nature of older religious tradition. There is no pre-existent immanent order of things as claimed by Confucianism. The order of human society and the order of the cosmos is produced and maintained by the purposeful cooperation of heaven, spirits, and men of good will. This is a sustained cooperation. In the face of inherently centrifugal tendencies of the pluralistic and recalcitrant world of the 10,000 things, Mozi insisted that order be imposed on chaos. Unless men believe that heaven, the spirits, and they themselves can exert themselves constantly and without relaxation against the disintegrating tendencies, disorder and chaos will prevail. In the book of Mozi, there is an account of the origins of human order. It is an account of man in a state of nature. This account of how order is created out of chaos is consistent with Mozi's religious outlook. Quote, in ancient times, when the people were first engendered at a time when there was no government, it is said that men all had their own views of what was right. For one man, there was one view of what was right, and for two men, two views. For 10 men, 10 views. Every man affirmed his own view and negated the views of others. Hence, in their intercourse, there was constant strife. Within the family, fathers, sons, and brothers resented and hated each other. Isolated and scattered, they could achieve no harmony or cooperation. The masses were as hostile to each other as fire and water. The disorder in the world was like that of birds and beasts. It was then understood that the cause of the disorder in the world was the lack of a ruler. Therefore, the wisest and most capable was selected as the Son of Heaven. Once the Son of Heaven was established, since his strength was insufficient, there was again a selection of the wisest and most capable, and they were appointed as the ministers. Unquote. This account of the origins of the state had several points against Confucianism. In this account, one's view of what was right was simply that they should serve their own individual interests. There is no mention of an imminent tendency toward morality, toward Ren. The sacred ties of family rooted in ancestor worship are in no way able to stop the war of man against man. This is rejection of Li. Mozi did not recognize an imminent good in individuals or any latent good order of society. The good is nothing pre-given. The good must be achieved. This was perceived by Mozi from the point of view of a total social political order. Mozi's political design is to highlight the effective will of heaven and spirits in a political structure. Heaven and the spirits relate to mankind only through the mediation of political order. In the oracle-born inscriptions of Shang dynasty, there was the belief that the high God's channel of communication with humanity is through universal king. With Mozi, the role of the Son of Heaven is in fact enhanced. Mozi did not posit the individual family as an alternative source of moral authority within society alongside that of the Son of Heaven. Rather, he took a state of nature as a state of atomized individuals in all-out conflict with each other. This leads to the notion that only by the concentration of a central authority or sovereignty in one ruler can conflicts among individuals or even groups be overcome. By this logic, men are supposed to conform to the will of those above, all the way up to the will of the Son of Heaven. The Son of Heaven is to conform his own will to the will of heaven. Underlying this logic is the notion that in dealing with common good of society, one must begin with the general interest of the whole society and regard all particular interests, whether of individuals or groups, only from the point of view of the whole. This can be done only when one has a situation, quote, where everyone approves of what is proved by the Son of Heaven, and everyone rejects what is rejected by the Son of Heaven, unquote. The Son of Heaven submits himself to the active will of heaven and of the spirits. Heaven and spirits love mankind and desire its welfare. In this way, the Son of Heaven strives for the common good of the whole world. To this end, the Son of Heaven, as the wisest and ablest, was selected from all the men in the world. Here, the selection has a special meaning. It means that since the wisest and ablest among men have a full comprehension of the situation, they are prompted to do the choosing. Those who have no wisdom are not likely to understand that the reason why disorder exists in the world is due to the fact that there is no ruler. To Mozi, although men in a state of nature may be equal in their self-regard, they obviously differ from each other enormously in their intellectual capacities. In this regard, Mozi seems to take intellect as a value more seriously than Confucius does. After all, it is through Mozi's own skill in reasoning that he undermines the false assumptions of Confucianists and establishes the truth of his own doctrine. It is precisely through their superior weight that the wise and able men in a state of nature were able to attain a true understanding of the human and divine worlds. The sages understood that if men continued to pursue their own self-interests, all would be miserable. They also understood that heaven and spirits love men and wish to benefit them. They knew that heaven wishes them to bring into being a system in which those who act well will be rewarded, and those who act wickedly will be punished. They thought that heaven provides the ultimate model for men. All men and women tend to be non-loving and self-interested. Only heaven, in its transcendental impartiality, sets the pattern for men. Quote, heaven is all-embracing and not selfish. Heaven is generous and ungrudging. Heaven's understanding is eternal and never declines. Therefore, the sage kings make heaven their standard. Heaven displays its love of all men by giving them all life and sustaining them. If one flouts heaven, heaven will inflict calamities. Because the sages made heaven their standard, all their actions were effective, unquote. Thus, the sage kings cooperated with heaven in constructing an ideal pattern of human society. Okay, this ends our discussion of Mozi's political design. Before we move forward, let me say a few words about the design features of Mozi's politics. There is a contrast between Confucian political design and Mozi's political design. In Confucianist politics, a social act derives its meaning from a ritual structure in which the social act takes place. In Moist politics, a specific political structure takes shape depending on how political agency evolves. A contrast like this can be traced back to the contrast between Zhou's emphasis on the rites and Shang's emphasis on the spirits. Historically, Confucius followed the footsteps of the Duke of Zhou in his political design. Mozi's alternative political design seems to have more to do with Shang's political model. For the details of this, I suggest you work them out after class.